So I'm going to start with a message today with a little trivia. See if you can finish this quote. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Very good. So then the second part of the trivia is, who said those words? Good. What's that? I heard another one. I thought maybe somebody would say William Shakespeare, but he only wrote those words. It was Juliet that said them. So, what's in a name? Juliet suggested that a name really doesn't matter. It's only the substance of the thing that the name is attached to that really matters. A rose will look like a rose, smell like a rose, whether we call it a rose or not. The reality is that names do have significance because they are our attempt to describe and identify the essence of a thing, to identify what a thing or a person is. And because of that, when we use a name, immediately mental pictures come to our mind. For example, if you say a rose, you picture that rose. If I were to say a freighter, you picture one of the big freighters out on the water. If I say a bacon double cheeseburger, maybe something more than a mental image comes to your mind. Maybe your mouth starts to water. Likewise, when we use human names, there's images that come to mind. If I were to say Michael Jordan, maybe you picture a basketball legend. Abraham Lincoln, picture of a guy with a tall top hat who led our country in the process of ending legalized slavery in this country. Colonel Sanders, back to food again. Chicken. How many parents here today spent a great deal of time trying to decide on a name for your children? So many options. Do we name a child after one of us or other family members? Do we choose a biblical name? Do we try to name them all with names that start with the same first letter? Do we try to come up with a name that's so unique that the child won't be able to spell it until they're in the 8th grade? A lot easier in the Old Testament. You named a person oftentimes based on characteristics or some other fitting description. For example, Adam is tied to the Hebrew word for soil. And God created Adam out of the earth, so there's earth, Adam. Eve means mother of all the living. So glad that I wasn't one of Isaac and Rebekah's children. Their first, so it's like they named them based on their first impressions. The firstborn comes out, Esau, and Esau basically it means hairy. He walks around the rest of his life with the name Harry. And then his brother comes out, his twin comes out, and he's grasping Esau's heel, and so he gets the name Heel Grabber. His name is Jacob. It's a good thing they didn't have more children, or there might have been names like Conehead, Chubby Cheeks, Screaming One. Just a little bit of fun to introduce our sermon series. We're beginning a new sermon series called I Am I? And this series, it focuses on 7 I am statements that Jesus made about himself. And just like we use names to tell who or what something is, these statements that Jesus made about himself in the Gospel of John, they tell his listeners who he is as the Son of God. They describe different truths about him, his divinity, and his purpose here. Listen to these 7 I am statements that we will look at over the next 7 weeks. Jesus said, I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the gate of the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life, and I am the true vine. We're going to look at each of these I am statements over the next 7 weeks, and hopefully we'll have a better grasp, a better mental image of who Jesus is as the Son of God, and we'll also be considering our response to each of those statements with the question, am I? For example, when Jesus said, I am the bread of life, the question for us will be, am I satisfied with him? The religious leaders in Jesus' day, they were offended and even angry about some of these statements that Jesus made, because some of these statements, in these, we see Jesus making claims about himself that sounded a whole lot like how God described himself in the Old Testament. For example, take again this Jesus' statement, I am the bread of life. Jesus was saying that just like God provided manna for the Israelites as they were wandering in the desert, Jesus was saying he is the true bread that comes from heaven. And it's a statement about being the one that provides the sustenance that we need in life. It sounds a whole lot like one of the names of God in the Old Testament that we might be familiar with, which is Jehovah Jireh, which just means God provider. But the heart of the Jewish leaders, religious leaders' objection to those statements are two little words at the beginning of each of Jesus' statements, and those two little words are, I am. There's one instance of this recording that's actually an eighth I am statement, but instead of the statement starting with I am, the statement ends with I am. And it's in John's Gospel, and those two little words almost got Jesus stoned. Jesus had this big, long exchange with the religious leaders about how they claimed that that Abraham was their father, and even that God was their father. And Jesus said, I beg to differ, your works say otherwise. And this is how that exchange ended. In John chapter 8, verse 56, he says, your ancestor Abraham rejoiced that he would see my day. He saw it and was glad. Then the Jews said to him, you are not yet even 50 years old, and have you seen Abraham? Jesus said to them, very truly I tell you, before Abraham was, I am. So they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. So what was it about that statement that caused the religious leaders to be so upset, so angry that they would pick up stones to stone him? The reason that they picked up the stones was that Jesus was claiming to be like God, in that, like God, Jesus existed before Abraham. Basically, like God, he existed from the very beginning, from before the beginning. Those two little words at the end of that statement were what really set them off. For those two little words, I am, are how God, Jesus' Father, first identified himself in the Old Testament. Basically, I am was how God wanted to be known by his people, the Israelites. And Jesus was claiming that same name, that same description for himself. The account of God making himself known as the I am takes place in the 3rd chapter of Exodus. And I want to read that. I want us to read that. But before we do, just a quick recap of the history up to this point in Exodus chapter 3. God called Abraham out of his own country and called him out to go to a land that he didn't know. And God told Abraham that he would make him a great nation, and that great nation, that people would inhabit this land that he was promising him. Abraham had a son named Isaac, and Isaac had a son named Jacob, and Jacob had 12 sons. I'm not going to name them all. And Jacob and his 12 sons, because of a great famine, had to go down to Egypt to find food. And while they were in Egypt, they ended up staying there. And while they were there, they began to multiply and multiply until they became this great people, so numerous that Pharaoh began to be concerned that someday they might turn on the Egyptians. And so they enslaved the Israelites and made life miserable and tried to even wipe them out by killing their firstborn sons. Actually, all their sons. And so this is the point where we pick up in Exodus chapter 3, and I'm going to begin in verse 1. Now Moses was keeping the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the back of the wilderness and came to God's mountain, to Horeb. Yahweh's angel appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the middle of a bush, and he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. Moses said, I will go now and see this great sight, why this bush is not burned up. This is one of the passages that makes me think that God has a sense of humor. So many times we do read in the Bible about God, speaking to somebody, coming to speak to them in a dream. It's all kind of as normal as God, the creator of the universe, is speaking to somebody. It's just kind of normal, like conversation, but it's like this time I'm going to have a little fun with Moses. It's like, let's do something and make him scratch his head and say, what in the world could that be? And it worked because Moses turned aside to go see what was going on. Verse 4 continues, when Yahweh saw that Moses came over to see, God called to him out of the middle of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. He said, here I am. He said, don't come close. Take off your sandals, for the place you are standing on is holy ground. Moreover, he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Yahweh said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good and large land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Now behold, the cry of the children of Israel has come to me. Moreover, I have seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppressed them. And I have to think up to this point, Moses is going, yes, that's awesome. And then God says, verse 10, come now, therefore, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Oops, a little too soon on the excitement there. Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? God, he said, certainly I will be with you. This will be the token to you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain, the very mount where that burning bush was. Moses said to God, behold, when I come to the children of Israel and tell them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What should I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, you shall tell the children of Israel this, I am has sent me to you. God said, moreover, to Moses, you shall tell the children of Israel this, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial to all generations. You might have noticed that God gives Moses two different names. First, God says, I am who I am. You shall tell the children of Israel this, I am has sent me to you. And then God says, you shall tell the children of Israel this, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob has sent me to you. Yahweh is the name, like most of your English translations, you won't see it because they've changed it to the word Lord. Some translations, like the one that I'm using, the World English Bible, actually puts the Hebrew word in there. But Yahweh is used throughout the Old Testament for God. We miss it because we don't read Hebrew, but the Hebrew word for Yahweh and the Hebrew word for I am are kind of like a play on words. And so when they used the word Yahweh for God, they understood that they were recognizing God as I am. So just picture this for a moment. Moses, he sees the burning bush, and he goes over there, and a voice speaks to him from the bush and calls him by name, Moses. So Moses asks, who are you? And the burning bush replies, I am who I am. So Moses replies, no way. And the bush replies, Yahweh. I am. What kind of name is that anyways? What does it even mean? Because the Hebrew language is a very dynamic language, it's really hard to capture in English. I am in Hebrew can be translated as I exist. If you remember that passage we read from John that was such an issue, was that Jesus was saying, before Abraham was, I existed, basically. And it can be translated, I will exist. It can be translated, I am. It can be translated, I will be. And there's some others. One scholar said it's not about which one of these is the best translation. It's rather that all of these convey the idea behind that Hebrew word. So it's like God was making a statement about having always existed and that he will always exist. And he's making a statement that he is and he will be. And he is what? He will be what? He is Israel's God, and he will be their God, and he will be with them and for them. And in fact, that's the basis of the covenant that he established later with the Israelites on that mountain where Moses was standing in front of that burning bush. The covenant that he established with them was that he would be their God. He would go before them. He would remove their enemies before them and take them into this land. He would be their God if they would be his people. So with that background of the words I am being God's name, being a description of God, both in the fact that he is and that he will be Israel's God, you can understand the difficulty that the religious leaders had with Jesus' statement. Because here is Jesus, who's a man of flesh and blood, just like them, who has to eat and drink and sleep just like them. And here this man is making a statement that equates himself with God. And they just could not believe Jesus was who he said he was. They really weren't much different than their ancestors, because their ancestors constantly doubted God, constantly turned away from God despite all the miraculous and impossible things that God did for them. And are they really much different than people today? How many people wish to dismiss Jesus as maybe just a good teacher? He said a lot of good things. But I like how C.S. Lewis put it. He said that Jesus is either an intentional liar, claiming to be something that he is not, or he's a lunatic. He's this crazy, delusional person who thinks something about himself that is not true, or he actually is Lord, exactly who he says he is. And this is the heart of the sermon series that we're going to do. Who does Jesus say he is? What does he claim about himself? And do we believe it? And even more importantly, how do we respond to what Jesus says about himself? When God revealed himself to Moses, besides hiding his face in fear, notice Moses' response to who God was and what God wanted Moses to do. He said, "Who am I?" And who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring out the children of Israel? Moses was expressing humility both in asking God, why would you choose me? And how would I, a simple shepherd in the wilderness, go before the most powerful ruler in the world and say, let the Israelites go? And I love how God doesn't answer Moses' question directly, but he does answer it. God says, I will be with you. The reality is Moses was a big nobody who became a big somebody because God was with him. Pharaoh wasn't going to listen to Moses. Even the Israelites questioned Moses, but because God was with Moses, directing him and empowering him, Pharaoh was humbled, brought to his knees, and Moses led a couple million people out of slavery. Who am I? That's a question I think most everyone asks themselves. You know, people travel and go off on adventures and do and try many things, seeking to find themselves, to figure out who they are, to figure out their identity. It reminds me of the beginning of the story of Abraham. After God destroyed the world with the flood, God directed Noah and his descendants to once again fill the earth. But sometime later, Noah's descendants decided they didn't want to be scattered throughout the whole earth. They didn't like God's plan. They said, let's build ourselves a great city with a tower that reaches the sky. And they said, let's make a name for ourselves. Let's choose our own identity. Let's determine our own destiny. And then God confused their language so they couldn't understand each other, and they scattered throughout the earth. It was shortly after this that God called Abraham and said, I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great. I will make your name great. Abraham chose to allow God to shape his identity, to define who he was, and as a result, not only did he become the father of a great nation, but through him, through his descendants, God brought his one and only Son, Jesus, into this world so that everyone who believes in him might have life and might discover who they really are. Question for us this morning: where are you finding your identity? Who or what are you looking to answer the question, who am I? And I know that the correct church answer is, well, in Jesus, in God. But if we're honest, that's not always true, is it? Sometimes we can get a little sidetracked and we can start trying to make a name for ourselves. We can start trying to find our own identity. Letting God define who we are is something we have to do on a daily basis. Because not only do we struggle with our own evil desires and our pride, we have an enemy who is constantly trying to get us to listen to the same lie that he got Adam and Eve to listen to, that we can be our own gods, determine our own identity. There's only one place where we can discover our true identity and where we can answer the question, who am I? And that is in the one who calls himself I am. So I'm looking forward to the next few weeks as Jesus reveals who he is through these I am statements in the Gospel of John. I'm looking forward to being challenged about what that means for who we are in Christ, what our response should be to who Jesus is, both our response individually and our response as a church. And I hope that you will be looking forward to this series also, and these revelations of Jesus about himself, and even preparing yourself in the week to come. The first I am statement that we're going to look at is Jesus' statement in John chapter 8, I am the light of the world. We're going to close, and would you pray with me?